In previous lectures, we've discussed the French Revolution's descent into madness, as well as Napoleon Bonaparte's seizure of power. But Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815 brought much-needed peace to Europe. Representatives from the belligerent powers convened in Vienna to hammer out a comprehensive treaty, one aimed at upholding a balance of power in the future. French representatives actively participated in discussions. There would be no punitive peace, and France's borders were restored to their pre-revolutionary state. This was done to prevent any resurgence of Napoleonism in the future, which might occur if the French people felt wronged by the peace. Mechanisms to resolve conflict among the great powers were devised as well. Austria, Prussia, France, and Russia joined together to form a holy alliance aimed at preventing revolutionary upheaval. This was easier said than done. France's monarchy was restored, and while a National Assembly still sat in Paris, it would take further revolutions in France in 1830, 1848, and 1871 before a republic would be definitively established. But the peace between Europe's great powers endured. Apart from the Crimean War of the 1850s, when Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire fought Russia over its expansionist ambitions in the Black Sea, there were no major European wars between 1815 and 1914. The wars that did occur, like the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 71, were brief and did not involve broad alliances of multiple powers. This long period of peace marks the height of Europe's power in the world, a belle epoque brutally shattered by the outbreak of the First World War. The Industrial Revolution brought a wide range of technological advancements. Engineers harnessed the power of steam to build railroads and steamships. Steel-framed buildings and industrial plants transformed cities from Manchester to Hamburg, and revolutions in communication enabled people and ideas to travel much faster than they ever had before. Journeys that took months in 1800 took days in 1870, and the emergence of undersea cables meant that messages could be received almost instantaneously. These twin advantages, a general peace and vast technological improvements, made Europe's century possible. But they also laid the groundwork for a century of imperialism, of colonial conquest and the imposition of imperial rule over vast swaths of Africa and Asia. Here the technological edge was decisive. We've seen how British gunboats overpowered Chinese defenses in the Opium War during the 1840s. Long-range howitzers, rapid repeating rifles, and eventually Maxim guns would provide European armies with an overwhelming battlefield advantage, one that did not exist prior to 1800 and would not exist again during the 20th century. At the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, when a small British force armed with Maxim, or machine guns, faced down massed ranks of Sudanese rebels, the British journalist Hilary Belloc reported that, quote, "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun and they have not." Nevertheless, it's important not to overstate the actual power Europeans possessed. Imperial maps like this one, where vast areas of the world were covered in red or blue to signify imperial rule, can obscure as much as they reveal. Sometimes imperial conquest was more apparent than real. Europeans claimed vast tracts of land without the consent or even the knowledge of local rulers, who sometimes simply carried on as before. Occasionally, local rulers paid tribute or exchanged one imperial sovereign for another. More direct rule often took a variety of forms. In Algeria, which France seized as a colony in 1830, the French government treated it as a province of France rather than an overseas colony. Algeria sent representatives to the National Assembly in Paris, though voting was restricted to the wealthy. And Algerian history textbooks famously began with, quote, "Our ancestors, the Gauls," referring to the ancient inhabitants of the land that became France. But in neighboring Tunisia, also a French possession, history textbooks said no such thing, and Tunisians did not send representatives to the National Assembly in Paris. Instead, a French colonial administrator ruled by fiat. In some cases, Europeans were driven by what they believed was a civilizing mission to educate the quote unquote natives and train them how to govern themselves. This was the so called white man's burden Rudyard Kipling referred to in his poem. The civilizing mission was often simply an excuse. Self government was thought to be centuries away, but some imperialists did take it seriously. For a generation deeply immersed in the Greco-Roman classics, Roman rule over Gaul or Britain was imagined to have been beneficial to the natives who lived there some 2,000 years before. In the 19th century, this civilizing mission meant spreading Christianity, European modes of dress, European languages and literatures, and other components of what we might define as Western culture. The goal was, as the English scholar Thomas Babington Macaulay put it with respect to India, to create, quote unquote, a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. But as we'll discuss later in the course, the civilizing mission contained within it the seeds of its own destruction. Imperialists often did succeed in creating a westernized elite in the countries they occupied, though this westernized elite was not as bound to the imperial project as some imperialists had hoped. Instead, many began to press for greater autonomy, which would then soon morph into demands for independence. Other non-European powers, among them Japan and the Ottoman Empire, saw a kind of self-imposed westernization as a means of challenging the West itself. Take these two images of Sultan Mahmud II, who in the 1830s radically reformed the Ottoman army and introduced a raft of Western reforms. His coronation portrait from 1808 shows him wearing traditional Ottoman dress, but Mahmud would attempt to reinvent himself as a European ruler and, like Peter the Great in Russia, ordered at least the elite within his empire to follow. Mahmud outfitted his army with the latest in European weaponry and eliminated more-bound orders like the Janissary Corps, which had hitherto been resistant to change. Mahmud's successor even invited Samuel Morse, the American inventor of the telegraph, to develop a comprehensive communication system throughout the Ottoman Empire. Japan would similarly undergo a crash course in westernization, importing French, German, British, and American experts to reform nearly every aspect of state and society. In 1904, when Japanese forces confronted Russian armies in the Russo-Japanese War, European observers thought that Russia would easily defeat its non-white foes. But the Japanese army was equipped with the latest in military technology and made short work of their Russian opponents. Though many Europeans long refused to accept it, the great age of imperialism had begun to come to an end.